here's the headlines this morning. Justin Baldoni has amended his lawsuit to provide proof that Blake Lively and the New York Times plotted for months to take him down. So in the new document, Justin is alleging that malicious and reckless defamation of his character started at least in October, and this is based on metadata from the New York Times article. So thanks to all of you and your digging, it's now come out that the metadata shows that the New York Times had started looking into at least this story before October 31st. So October 31st is the date that the outlet developed a tool to help them display the text messages that were a big part of Blake's article. Now, Justin's team is claiming in this article that because it was started in October, it strips away the legal shields that Lively, the Times, and other Lively parties were likely going to use to protect their malicious acts of defamation. So instead of me trying to explain what's going on here, I'm going to let someone who's a bit more of an expert on this topic cover it. This is Brent from his channel Ex-Patriarch, and Brent is a social media activist and also an advocate for gender issues.
So giving it to the New York Times before it's filed in court is something a victim would do. Before the New York Times article was ever published, Baldoni's own team leaked the complaint to the press and gave us all the evidence to prove it. Lively's legal team noted that they filed the complaint on Friday, December the 20th, and at the same time sent a copy of the CRD complaint to Baldoni's legal team. At 9:46 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, December the 20th, New York Times reporter Megan Twohey requested plaintiff's response to an imminent 4,000-word bombshell story. Yet just hours later, TMZ begins working on an article titled "Blake Lively Sues Justin Baldoni for Sexual Harassment Smear Campaign." This was at 2:10 a.m. Eastern Time. Baldoni's attorney Brian Friedman is also up at this hour, and just 6 minutes later, at 2:16 a.m., sends his response to the New York Times request for comment. December the 21st at 7:54 a.m. Eastern Time, TMZ published their article and are the first to break the story, which includes Brian Friedman's private correspondence to the New York Times, calling the allegations fake, outrageous, intentionally salacious, and with an intent to publicly hurt. Since the New York Times had yet to publish this, it shows that Baldoni's own team leaked both the complaint and Friedman's response to TMZ.
So basically, Blake Lively's the victim in this situation, and she's allowed to share her story. That was his biggest fear, that she was going to come out with these allegations. However, it's interesting to note that she's not the one that came out with this story first. It was actually his team. They leaked it to TMZ, who then in return posted the story well before the New York Times ever posted. Every article that first came out was actually quoting the TMZ article and not the New York Times article because it wasn't even released yet.
10:11 a.m. Eastern Time, the New York Times publishes their article, as listed by both Baldoni's complaint and the metadata on the New York Times article itself.
Now, I highly recommend you go and watch Brent's video because he actually gives you the timestamps and the examples of all of these news articles that were posted between the time the TMZ article came out and the New York Times was published. I have no doubt that the New York Times was probably working on this article long before the release date. Blake's team had probably sent them all the information knowing they were going to be filing this complaint. I also believe she had every right to come forward with these allegations, and again, that was his biggest fear. That is why he hired the PR crisis team to handle the situation.
Baldoni is giving us a masterclass in abusive manipulation. When his team learned that one of his victims was going to speak out, they worked through the night to ensure that her voice was drowned out, to dominate the headlines, to make sure there were dozens of articles written discrediting her claims before her voice ever had a chance to be heard. In short, a man accused not just of sexual misconduct, but also of carefully orchestrating leaks to the press in order to damage his victim's reputation in retaliation, responded to the news she was going to make those allegations public by carefully orchestrating a leak to the press in order to damage his victim's reputation in retaliation. Not just then, but virtually every day since, for well over a month.
Justin Baldoni has actually not denied most of the allegations that Blake Lively has put forward, instead basically coming after her, blaming her for the situation or excusing them away. According to a lot of the experts who are now coming forward and discussing this situation, this is classic textbook abusive behavior, turning the blame from themselves onto their victim.
And yet, despite concrete evidence of his continued abusive behavior, we're once again expressing doubt over Blake Lively because she has the audacity to not be the right kind of victim. She's too mean, she isn't disgusted enough, she didn't speak out the right way, why did she go public? Why is she inconveniencing him this way? She's crazy, unhinged, incompetent, deceptive. The same playbook that's used every time a woman speaks up. Baldoni's own PR team acknowledged there are at least 2 other HR complaints against Wayfarer. And seeing how Lively has been treated, the PR campaign that has been waged against her and anyone who supports her, like Colleen Hoover, who had to delete her Instagram account, how do you think those other victims feel about coming forward? Do you think they feel empowered to tell their story, to identify themselves, stand up and speak out? Or do you think they feel scared and threatened into staying silent? Because that is exactly what an abuser would do. They will use their last breath to continue to abuse their victim.